Good evening. I'm Monica Harris, Executive Director of FAIR, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Supporting Teachers Under Pressure, Leadership in Polarized Times. Also, in full disclosure, I'm recovering from a very nasty cold, so I apologize in advance for any coughing fits I may experience. All across America, dedicated teachers are facing an impossible choice: to stay true to their educational mission and risk their careers, or retreat into silence and abandon the very principles that drew them to education. From Seattle, Washington to Fort Wayne, Indiana, from progressive districts to conservative communities, educators are discovering that the polarization that's consuming our public discourse has now invaded their classrooms, not as a subject to study, but as a force that threatens the very foundation of learning itself. So tonight, we'll hear directly from stakeholders who've witnessed this crisis firsthand. They'll share not just what's happening in our schools now, but more importantly, what we can do about it. Because this isn't just about protecting individual teachers. It's about preserving an educational environment where students can encounter diverse perspectives, engage in authentic dialogue, and develop the critical thinking skills that our democracy desperately needs. And the stakes couldn't be higher, because when educators can't teach students and students can't learn across their differences, we all lose. But solutions do exist, and tonight we'll explore practical ways to restore educational excellence while supporting and protecting the educators who make it possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guests this evening. Ed Roos holds a master's in education from Antioch University, a principal certification from the University of Washington, and a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from Western Washington University. After serving as a sales manager for a local software company, Ed made a bold mid-career transition into education. And over the next 17 years, he dedicated himself to Seattle public schools as both a teacher and administrator. But in 2020, amid the shifting tides of cancel culture, Ed's tenure came to an unexpected and abrupt end. Today, Ed contributes part-time to the nonprofit sector and offers education consulting services. He's currently writing a book that chronicles his experiences within the Seattle school system. Excuse me. Park Ginder has 38 years of service in education. He graduated from Ball State University in 1986 with the BS in Art Education and a master's from IPFW in 1994. He obtained a certification in school administration in 2002 and an education specialist degree from Indiana University Bloomington in 2007. And then he received a PhD at Purdue University in 2018. Excuse me. He served as an assistant principal for 9 years, a high school principal for 10 years, and was superintendent of Southwest Allen County Schools in Fort Wayne, Indiana, for 3 years. Park is currently serving in his second year as executive director of Grow Allen, a nonprofit in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with the goal of assisting all 17 high schools in the county to ensure that every high school graduate in Allen County knows what they want to do, they know how they want to achieve it, and have the tools to successfully become an adult. So let's dive into our discussion tonight. And Ed, I'd like to start with you. I'd like you to explain to us, in your own words, the best of your understanding, what DEI is versus what it should be and what it was intended to be, and the pressures and political landmines teachers face as a result of this disconnect.
Yeah, I'd like to just, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to share my story and have this discussion. Since I was canceled in 2020 and then wrote about it with FAIR just a couple weeks ago, I've had a lot of educators reach out to me from all across the country. We've had a lot of discussions, and it's been just a great growth and learning opportunity. I would like to say that, yes, I worked for Seattle schools for 17 years. I had a great experience until the last, like about 2018, 19, where there was a shift in culture there to what I would call kind of a radicalization of DEI and woke. And the way I would tell it or explain the way those two work together is that woke is kind of the rules that came along that we needed to follow. And the way it worked was that it kind of worked in this way of there are some certain things that you should not talk about or do, and we're not going to tell you what they are. They're just these landmines out there. But when you step on them, we're going to cancel you and destroy your life. And that's the point where it got around 2020, where everything was just kind of coming together, where we had I was in a DEI training where the conclusion of the training was that all white people were racist, should take a sign that says I'm a racist, hang it around your neck and post it on social media. And then the presenter, who was from the school district, showed someone who had done that before. And that to me was kind of, I guess, the climax of holy cow, this has gotten out of hand. And I've since heard from other educators who were in Seattle schools that had similar DEI trainings where someone showed up to a DEI training, put a picture of their white male boss and said, this person is a racist. And so I think that it got to the point where DEI had gone too far. Now, what I want to point out is that since I've been having discussions with people, you could go just 30 minutes out of Seattle and it was a much different experience. I had a great talk with a friend of mine who teaches in the area where I live now. And his experience with DEI was much different. So when we're having this discussion and I'm telling him, boy, DEI was a little bit crazy, he said that was not my experience where I teach. Where I teach, it was about being inclusive and celebrating cultures and doing all of this positive work around DEI. And that it just clicked with me that I'll share my experience and what I went through at Seattle schools, but it is not everyone's experience. If I could just touch on what I think that DEI could look like and should look like. And I'll give an example of what we did at my school. I was principal of View Ridge Elementary in Seattle at the time. Now, of course, you got to follow equal rights laws. That's kind of a given. And you can certainly allow programs and clubs that are open to everyone, and affinity groups and all these other things. Those are important. Uh, at View Ridge, we had a great art teacher there who posted Native American art all over the building. We did for a Black History Month, we did Black inventors throughout history projects that the classes did together, and they posted their projects of Black inventors. So you could walk in our building and learn about Black inventors throughout history. There were field trips to museums to learn about Asian American, Native American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And we also did this exercise once where I asked the staff to walk through our building and look at our building from different lenses. For example, I would ask them to look through the lens of African Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans, LGBTQ, and see where they're represented in our building. And if they weren't represented, I asked them to let me know, and we made a plan to make sure that they were represented. We ordered posters, we did projects, we made sure that when people came in our building, they were represented and felt connected and welcome. And this is the way that, in my opinion, DEI should be. I'm still a firm believer in diversity and inclusion. I'm not opposed to that. I'm highly opposed to radicalization of it when you're starting to say that all white people are racist. And I want to talk about as a result of that, my school was awarded a school of recognition for our work on reducing the opportunity gap. This was with the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight and Accountability Committee with the state of Washington. And in our family survey for the spring of 2019, our greatest increase was on welcoming and culturally responsive school climate. Now, I think that as part of some of the radicalization, I think this is what all of this anti-DEI stuff is kind of where it was born out of. And, and then they came out with this executive order to ban it. But when I studied the ban, it doesn't really ban it. It's trying to ban what I would consider the radicalization of it. You could still do the things that I mentioned above. Those are not against the policy. But I would encourage people that if you do come across things that make you uncomfortable, like a hyper focus on oppressors and oppressees or saying that all white people are racist, that there is now on the Department of Education a portal you could go to. If you go there and Google DEI portal for Department of Education, you can report schools and they can lose their funding. I think it's important that we do report that and keep DEI the way it's supposed to be. I would also recommend that people go to the National Education Association, Google a lawyer explains DEI, and listen to their attorney explaining how DEI can still be done in schools in a positive way, as I explained above.
All right, thank you, Ed. Um,
Yes.
Park, an administrator, as a superintendent, have you seen any disconnects between DEI as it's intended to operate in theory and DEI as it actually plays out on the ground in classrooms?
Well, let me first say I've never been canceled like Ed, so my experience ends with noise and emotion from others that impacts the classroom and so forth. Um, and we never in my community had any sort of oppressor, oppressee kind of language. Now, there would be players in the community who would have wanted or maybe still want that in the works, take a little aggressive approach to DEI. I would say most of the people in our community are uh, willing to express care and love for diversity and equity and inclusion, as long as the equity piece doesn't mean unfettered equal outcomes. We're all kind of familiar with the desire for our teams to win, and we wouldn't want equity on the basketball floor. We want the best five kids we can get. So there's a sense, I think, um, in our history locally, we were posting units of study, history lessons, biographies. We were very intentional about what was in our libraries so that it was representative works of art and writing from across um, the historical cultures that make up our community. When I say historical cultures, my last name is German, but I'm about as German as any dead skunk at this point. At some point, most people, as they matriculate through life, they give up some of those hard connections to our past. It doesn't matter. Yeah, am I proud of being a German American? No, not anymore. Eighth generation, I think that kind of goes away. But I think it's important. I think our people in our area were at one time challenged by critical theory, the writings of Giroux, and all of those who kind of were the birth of some DEI thinking. But for the most part, I may have lost your question here in my ramble, but I would say uh, good things have come of being aware of celebrating who we are and what we are, and understanding we're all part of I subscribe to the notion that we're all the same race. We're the human race. You just happen to look different than me, or you've got different experiences. That just is great as far as I'm concerned. And I think most of the educators I worked with would have felt the same way.
Okay. Very good note that that by the time you reach your eighth generation, of any race or ethnicity, you really start to lose those tight roots and connections, and you lean more into the American experience. We're Americans, and that's what we would really like to emphasize at FAIR is that we're all part of the American experience. Ed,
Yes,
so you referenced your Substack piece. It was one we
I
got a
did.
lot of engagement with. Yes. So your story represents what many educators fear. It's their worst fear.
Mm.
So can you take like 5 minutes and just walk us through how a single false accusation evolved into a career-ending situation and to what extent you believe DEI contributed to this?
I think I could put that all together. I'll say that as I'm working on my manuscript about this, I wrote 800 pages about it. So it's a very convoluted story. I'll give you the 400-page version right now. But, it all started when I was walking into the interview. Uh, for assistant principal at View Ridge. There was a colleague of mine walking out, and we ran into each other in the alley. And she stopped me and she just said, "Hey Ed, just FYI, I interviewed for this for practice, but she said if you get offered the job, don't take it. There's an African American teacher who has discipline and performance concerns, has for years. She'll make it all about discrimination if you talk to her about it, and she's going to destroy your career." And I had no idea how true that was going to become. I really just thought, yeah, right. You just don't want me to take the job so that you can have it, but I was wrong. So, I do get to meet this teacher. We were very friendly for many years. We worked together. At our school, we had a building leadership team that was made up of people from every department. So, every grade level, special ed, um, ELL, all the other departments. And she was on the building leadership team. And so we spent 2 years together, very closely working. Uh, when it came to Black History Month, she said, "Hey, I've always wanted to do this Black Inventors Throughout History project." And I said, "Let's do it." And she was a little bit taken aback. It was like, "Whoa, really? You're going to work with me?" And I said, "Yeah, let's make it happen." We did it together. It was a great success. We started some equity teams at our school. She was a part of that. She planned our MLK assemblies. I helped her with an all-school play when she missed going to some of the rehearsals. I covered for her. But the one thing that I just couldn't let go is that she was a kindergarten teacher arriving after the school bell. And these are 4 and 5-year-old kids being left alone, and there was no warning. And it happened almost a dozen times before I finally told her, "Hey, we need to take this to the next step and go through progressive discipline." And so we had to talk with HR. She cried crocodile tears, got a slap on the wrist. And as soon as we left that room, those tears stopped. And she turned to me and said, "You should not have done that." And that was in I think February of 20, right around there. And, and this was right around the time that there was this whole thing of in the district of all white people are racist that was coming from our equity department. And I think when the district sets up the pins of all white people are racist, that then everything that you do is looked through the lens of being a racist. And I just felt like at that point, it just kept coming at us. I was having parents calling me and saying, you know, this teacher was racist because she sent my student to the office. I had someone say that I was racist for sending kids to the principal's office, to which I pointed out, I don't send kids to the principal's office. I am the principal. I'm in the office. So it's just like everything started to become about racism because I think the district set the tone for that. And so the pins were set up, and then the perfect storm came. We had the George Floyd protests right around that time. The district was under pressure from the NAACP. Our superintendent was under the same pressures that I was, being accused of discrimination. At some point, the president of the school board went through something similar. So it was just the perfect storm and very ripe for someone to create a fake story. So this teacher creates a fake story that I had put an African American student in a cage. You could read my story about it. You could see a picture of exactly where he was when this accusation was made. You'll see that it's clearly a play court. It was a timeout space. Everything we did with a student was to keep him safe. But I feel like this teacher just weaponized that time and the situation. And so as a result, the district came to me and said, "Hey, we hear there's a reporter who's going to write about this. We got to save face and we're going to let you go." So Friday, they sent me a letter to let me go. By Sunday night, they're having the Principal Association of Seattle Schools rep call me, who would kind of be like our union rep, but not exactly, and pressuring me to sign, before we even get to Monday. It was just a crazy time. And so the district found no wrongdoing on my part. And so they couldn't fire me. They just paid out the rest of my contract and forced me out. Then the article came out about a month after that. It was a horrible article that went viral. It started with he caged him, or he had something like a cage. It was like a cage or like caging him. And then there were headlines that said I was caging a child like an animal. It just went viral and got crazier as the stories went on. And the thing to point out is that not one news source reached out to me for comment other than the original. And I was even on the lead story on a local evening news. They didn't even call me to get my side of the story. So this went crazy, went viral. I couldn't get a job after that. I was blacklisted from all the districts around here, and not just from public schools, but the private sector or any job would Google my name, see these horrible headlines, and I just could not get out from under this rock. And here it is, 5 years later. I'm still having problems getting back into it. I have a job that pays about a fifth of what I used to. Great company, great organization, but it's just been a huge struggle to get back. So here I am trying to tell my story. Fair and I have been trying to get the story out for years. No one really wanted to print it or talk about it until about now. So now it's happening.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I know it's a powerful one that's moved. It certainly moved us at FAIR when we first heard about it, and we knew we had to get behind you. But again, based on the responses we got from that Substack article, it's clear that uh, your story has really touched a nerve. Um, let's see. This is a question from a viewer. Probably with some merit, social media often gets blamed for polarization and smartphones for making so many of us superficial. Do you see a role for computing technology to improve discourse? And if so, how might that play out? Would one of you gentlemen like to take that?
Boy, I think that plays into
Oh.
one of my thoughts that I've shared with others. I don't know if there's any computing technology that will improve the discourse. Where I'm going with this is I often encourage my peers, whether they were school leaders, like a principal, assistant principal, especially a disciplinarian, but also our teachers, stay off of social media. The feelings and things that people have, I think they still were out there in the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. We just didn't hear about them. And now they bounce around so much and they just get amplified. And so I'm not answering the question the way it was phrased, but I do think that there's great strength in not availing yourself to that information. I think when I think about the things that happened in our schools they got progressively worse, it was because of social media and smartphones and all that kind of stuff that's alluded to in the question.
We
And can I
Oh, go
piggyback
ahead.
on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely, of
I mean,
course.
I agree with everything that Park said, and it's social media is an absolute disaster for educators right now because I've made this a distinction between cancel culture and revenge culture, and how I think we're really more in a revenge culture. And so if you wrong somebody or you upset somebody, they know that 24/7 they could get online and write a false story about you online. And as I've been making my rounds and talking with educators, I'm shocked at how many of them have been lambasted online and had to defend themselves against attacks online. It's just a 24/7 smear opportunity for people right now for revenge culture.
Um, I just like to follow up on that and say that we at FAIR are trying to use technology to our advantage to facilitate civil discourse and to help bridge the divide. And to that end, we have actually are incorporating in our curriculum an app called Sway, which is a chat platform that connects students with differing perspectives in one-on-one conversation, and it facilitates better discussions between them. I'm going to ask Dave to drop that in the chat, and I think this will be very helpful to our viewers and to any educators and students you can share this with. So let's move on to the actually before we move on, I forgot Park. I wanted to sort of loop back on the cancellation issue with you. Now, you're in a more conservative school district, not uber progressive like Seattle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that teachers are safe. So I'm guessing you may not have seen teachers or superintendents canceled for expressing their views about DEI or their concerns about DEI, but in this polarized landscape, have you seen educators in your district caught in the crosshairs of the culture war in any way?
Oh, certainly. Going back to rumors and stories, there was a time when teachers and administrators in our district and many others across the country were attacked for a story about furries and students going to the bathroom in cat boxes in our schools and so forth. There was a sense, there have been at different times, a sense that I heard it, so it must be real. And at different times, teachers have had to put up with or suffer through times when they heard so and so did this in your school, and it probably gained some traction somewhere in some state. Somebody made a mistake, but all of a sudden it was in every school. You know, you need to be aware that X, Y, and Z is happening. I think the most important thing that administrators can do with and for teachers is to be with them and for them in the times when they are attacked. That means sitting with them when parents come in. If you have a feeling it's going to be a contentious conversation, and there's nothing wrong with it being a difficult conversation, but I think, as Ed is saying, we've crossed a line between difficult and uh, boy, I don't know what the right word is because not dangerous either, but finger pointing and screaming is not something that is going to be good in an education environment. And helping your teachers by being there to call a timeout, maybe to cancel that conversation, to tell parents we're done, we're going to come back another day and talk about this. Um, the things that I often worried about for my teachers was a parent, and there weren't many in our district, but a parent coming in and creating using accusation as the number one tool to get their way. And at some point, sometimes it feels better just to give up rather than to do what's right. And that's when administrators need to stand with their teachers and understand that as long as we haven't made a mistake, as long as we're not doing something egregiously wrong, we're going to do what's right in our school. So what I'm saying is we would never defend you as a person if you've harmed a child, if you're lying about what happened in your classroom, if you're doing something that's outside the curriculum. Hey, you're going to probably wear that one, and I'll stand with you while you're wearing it. But at the same time, if our teachers are doing what they're supposed to do, and I would tell you the overwhelming majority, at the highest percentage, they care about your kids. They want the best for your kids, and they're not here to harm your child. And so I always harken back to I'm a father of four. I have 9 grandkids now. Um, I'm not the same teacher I was when I was 22. Parents want the best for their child, and often the ones that are most upset with you as a school had a bad experience in school themselves. So they just assume you're out to get their kid because Mr. Smith got me when I was in school. So there's so much benefit to being a listener and hearing about that pain and working through it with parents and then bringing them back to the point where they understand that we're here to do the best for your child and bring them through school as a learner, not just somebody who's getting grades and answering questions, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does. That does. Um, let's move on to a subject that's extremely concerning to many parents now, and has become a major source of polarization. And there was also the inspiration for FAIR's American Experience curriculum, and that would be liberated ethnic studies. So, Ed, I'm gonna pivot this to you first. Can you talk, just explain for people, give a sort of a capsule summary of how you see liberated ethnic studies, and the influence it is having in classrooms today?
Yes. So, Liberated Ethnic Studies is obviously an ethnic studies program. I was able to find some copies of it on the Seattle Schools website, as well as OSPI, which is our state governing body for education. Um, and to be honest with you, found it to be very concerning. It is definitely a focus on oppressors and oppressed. And I don't think in the educational system should there ever be language to any student that you're going to struggle in life and maybe not be able to get ahead because of oppression or any boundaries for that matter. School is going to be hard enough. The dropout rates are really high. And if you get to high school, you're already struggling and you've been getting years of a message that you're not going to be able to get ahead. I think our dropout rate will only increase. It should just be, about how everyone has equal opportunity to get ahead, and you're going to have to work hard and give them the path they need to be successful, and not tell people that you can't make it in life. Uh, it also this program also study or teaches students that our country is currently still inherently racist. It uses words like white supremacies and the master narrative. It states that they need to gain white allies, as if that to me sounds like war talk. What kind of battle or war are you trying to start here? And then the most concerning thing for me, I might sidetrack here a bit, but there's this book by Luc Rosiak called Race to the Bottom. I would encourage everyone to read this. The subheading is Uncovering the Secret Forces Destroying American Public Education. It's an important book right now for everyone to read and see what's going on in your school system. In this book, there's a whole chapter dedicated to Seattle schools. And it does quote equity manager at Seattle schools. It's basically stating that, I think, to her boss, that you're just a white person, and therefore everything you say is racist. So there's this anti-white racism going on at Seattle schools. I think this was probably back in 19 or 20 that he's talking about. But again, it was such a powerful, strong message at that time. I highly doubt that it's completely dissipated now. But the person that they talk about in chapter 5 of Race to the Bottom is also cited on the Liberated Ethnic Studies as a contributor. And I would ask parents on this, do you want someone who blatantly states that all white people are racist contributing to a curriculum that's going to go into schools? And here's the part that I find so disturbing about that comment. When you say that all white people are racist, you're not just saying all people in this room we're talking to. You're talking about all the white parents in your district. You're talking about all the white students as young as 4 years old. You're saying all white people. And I just find it so disturbing that anyone in education would insinuate or look at a child as a racist as young as 4 years old. And that's what I think that LES is doing.
It's funny, I'd never even heard that term until Monica. I had to look it up here on my iPad while we were talking. Never heard of such a thing. But it made me think of a comment that I would often use with students when they said they gave the impression that there was nothing they could learn from their white teacher. And I would turn them on them and say, well, then by that thinking, then I can learn nothing from you. And that's not true. In just this conversation, we're learning from each other. Do you see how that works? And it was fun to watch student-aged people and even some of their parents in these conversations where, I want a black teacher in my school too. I want several of them. I want many. I want the best teachers possible. But to think that I can only learn from somebody that looks like me, or that my mind, when with Ed talking about the notion that you're never going to make it because of racism. Boy, I would never want a student of mine, any color, ethnic background, religion. I would never want any of them to feel that, and I don't want to put that on anybody. That's very interesting. I wish I had known it before I do some study on it. Monica, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Park. I think you also mentioned in one of our conversations that, even though you haven't had experience with liberated ethnic studies per se, that you have seen efforts by players outside the classroom to influence classroom curricula, not from the left, but from the right. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when we had issues generally, it was going to be in biology, it was going to be in English class, depending on what we were reading, or it was going to be in U.S. history or history in general. Nobody really cared about algebra, right? There's not a lot to argue about there. But at the secondary level, from time to time, you'd have somebody on either ends of the bell curve, those tails, whether they were far left or far right, who was angered by whatever piece of information was being studied. And I felt like our teachers did a tremendous job. The more we spent going back to primary source documents and actually looking at what people were saying, writing, and doing at the time, rather than focusing on what a specific history book might say. When I say history book, I'm talking about a piece of curriculum, not something written by a historian or an academic somewhere. But when we went back to the source as far back as we possibly could, we very rarely had um, issues because we were using an inquiry-based study method where all of us were looking at what was happening and coming to summations of what it was at the time or what we were looking at. And if we do those things, we should be able to have conversations, whether it's sex ed, origins in science, and look at all the different sides. And periodically, there were people who didn't want to see both sides, and they tended to be on either ends of that tail, whether they were um, ultra conservative or ultra liberal.
Thank you. Um, all right, let's shift now to the classroom influence at a higher level. I think one of the questions that many parents have, and even people who aren't parents, just looking at this from the outside in, is what role do school boards and, those sort of larger policies in your districts play in either exacerbating or mitigating politically charged pressures on teachers? I think that there's this misconception that teachers move in lockstep and schools move in lockstep, but there's actually more autonomy. At least it's my understanding talking to teachers. You know, there's more autonomy sometimes in classrooms than we think. There's not a lot of standardization. One teacher might be teaching this, another teacher might be teaching that across across town. Another school may not even be teaching liberated ethnic studies, but one might. So there's really not any sort of uniformity. But I'm just curious if you could each speak to the role that school boards have played in contributing to, if at all, to the polarization we're seeing in schools today.
Ed, I'll go
Ed,
first.
yeah, okay. Yeah, pardon.
School boards, when functioning well, are boards of governance. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they should be taking positions of policy publicly in a board meeting. The language in the state of Indiana used to be that the board was a meeting and the meeting of the board in public. It didn't mean it was a public board meeting. And the change
Mm.
in the approach has been that I would say during the pandemic and then post-pandemic became that the public meeting of the board, the meeting of the board in public became something where all of us fought over the issues of the day. And the most healthy of school boards will sit and listen and take note, and then in executive session or in other times with the superintendent one-on-one or two-on-one, have conversations and then begin to shape policy and procedure. But when board members play out their feelings and opinions in public, that does great danger to the school district and to the school and to the teacher involved if it is that granular. Like you're saying, Monica, many districts or schools don't have very organized curriculum. My history in the four schools that I worked in over the course of my career, we were very aligned, but it was teachers that did that work within departments. The board wasn't making that decision. Um, and so we determined, hey, these are the books we're going to read. And then they were vetted, and then we went through them. And sometimes we got kicked in the shins because we were reading Mark Twain, and it's difficult. But taken in the times that it was written and understanding who Twain was and his own passage through life and his racism and how it changed over time. And
Hmm.
yet he still struggled with his language and so forth. All those kinds of things can make difficult curriculums easier to uh, study at the high school level. Let's also understand that there's a big difference between the conversations and curriculum you can have with a junior or senior than there is a sixth grader, an eighth grader, a fourth grader, right? There's no reason in my mind that we should be having really difficult questions beyond the notion of love and support for our fellow classmates
Hmm.
at an elementary level. But by the time we're juniors and seniors, we ought to be able to have really difficult questions posed to us and then take positions in class to talk about those, read about it, and then, have conversation. I would say in our community in Northeast Indiana, in my experience, how's that? Sometime around 2015, there was a big shift. And we went from kids expressing their faith, whether it was faith in a Christian God, a Muslim faith, or Jewish faith. We went from supporting and loving one another, regardless of our race or ethnicity, to starting to be very quiet about those issues because we were afraid we were going to get barked at. And I felt that was just a bad thing. And I think that just got worse when our school boards started playing out personal opinions in public.
Well, I mean, you said it well. I don't have much to add to that. I would go back to the race to the bottom. When Luke Rosiak is uncovering the secret forces destroying American public education, he has a whole section in there about uh, people getting on school boards that have ulterior motives. They have their thing that they want to get on there for, and then they're going to focus on that one thing. For example, there might be a school board member who is on there for no other reason than they want to ban certain books in libraries, and so they focus on that. And then when everybody has their own thing and their own reason for being on the school board, and you're no longer focusing on the kids or the students. I think it just adds to part of the problem and the division that we have in our schools.
I wanted to pivot to an interesting question we just got from one of our viewers. Um, Very provocative. He says schools are ecosystems, and the Serengeti rules suggest that greater diversity and variety in an ecosystem result in more stable and productive environments. Identifying and eliminating bad or predator or oppressor species, and by this metaphor or analogy, I'm sure he's thinking that white people, white culture being bad. By eliminating them from the ecosystem, it usually results in an impoverished system. Do you see this happening at your level in schools? I mean, I know it's a pretty esoteric question, but I thought it was a really interesting analogy. Either of you want to touch that?
I have a hard
Yeah,
time processing that. Do you think he's asking, is there an intentional removal of, say, white people in schools?
No, I think what he's saying, I don't want to speak for this person, but I think what they're saying is that in the wild, when you try to remove the bad players, the bad elements, and of which in schools and in our society now, white people are considered to be the bad players, the bad elements, the predators, the oppressors. When you remove those animals in an ecosystem in the wild, it actually destabilizes you know, the ecosystem. It impoverishes it. So I guess what he's saying is that diversity is necessary in all forms. In other words, even the people you don't like. And it's not just about diversity in the sense of perspective and race and blah blah blah. It's also um, diversity with respect to players who may not be welcomed all the time, players who may be controversial. The diversity in all respects is good, and I mean, it's just something interesting to consider. I don't want to belabor it too much, but
I mean, I would certainly agree with that, that diversity is very important. And I started out when we were talking about DI, about how diversity and inclusion is important. And I think that to create healthy schools, we really have to come to the table and start respecting each other and listening from each other and learning from each other rather than attacking each other and creating this division. So, absolutely, I think diversity and understanding each other's cultures and backgrounds and where people come from is extremely important. If we got to celebrating our differences, which was kind of the key movement of, say the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, where it was all about celebrating. And I think that would be important. I went to high school in Seattle, right in the heart of Seattle, in what was predominantly the Black neighborhood. And, the majority of that school was African Americans, and I loved going there. We all respected each other. We just had discussions with each other. There was no attacking each other. I wasn't uncomfortable being in a Black community, and I don't think that they felt discomfort. We all just respected and talked and joked with each other, and really, I really enjoyed my time going to that school, and I think that diversity is important and needs to be respected in schools.
I think the most difficult form of diversity for older students, and I think this begins in about sixth grade, to be honest, is economic diversity. When the haves and the have-nots can tell they're a have or a have-not, it becomes more and more difficult for the have-not kid. And I taught long enough in a middle school to watch our poor sixth graders come into that environment with high energy and high interest in learning. But if they came from certain communities, it could have been a white trailer park, it could have been from inner city African American community, it could have been from migrant or immigrant families. There was a time when the kids came to the understanding that they didn't have, and that became more difficult. And the times when uh, you can take that barrier and hide it. I think those schools are very, very, very successful. It's one of the reasons I always was intrigued with the notion of public school uniforms, because if I can't stick my fanciness at you by what I wear, and we're all more normal with each other, I think it's one of the reasons why football teams and track teams and baseball teams are successful. We put on the uniform and we represent our school. It doesn't matter where I live in the community. So in my mind, color, race, ethnicity, religion are far less difficult to traverse than economic diversity that's really a wide range.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also to clarify the question that I received from the viewer, I don't think that the viewer was asserting that white people are predators or bad or anything like that, only that radical elements of our society, through liberated ethnic studies and otherwise, view white people as bad or dangerous or oppressive. And that's just precisely what Ed relayed in his experience, where he was told that all white people are racist. Crazy. But the Serengeti rules make the point that in no healthy society benefits when any members are removed or canceled, regardless of the motive or goal for removing them. We all need to be present, and we all have a right to be in the society. And society is better for it, when we're all present and not canceled. Anyway, I'd like to move on to solutions. Thank you. Based on your experience, now let's start with you again first, Ed.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, what policies do you think schools should implement to protect teachers from false accusations, while also addressing legitimate discrimination concerns that may exist? And what specific support systems would have helped you navigate the situation you faced in a better way?
So to protect them from false allegations, I would say that as a principal, when I receive complaints about a teacher, if it was a one-off, I just didn't give it a lot of weight. And if it seemed like it was just kind of way out there in right field, like if it was, hey, this teacher looked at me the wrong way, or this teacher did this or that, and it's just a one-off, I kind of let it go. I looked for patterns of complaints. And so then if I start to get another one that is, this teacher is mean to students in the classroom, first time I'm like, Okay. Second one, I'm like, okay, we probably need to put this on my radar. Third one, we're going to have a talk, and then follow up and make sure that the behavior is changing and improving. I've had that happen many times in my career, but I think as a principal or any administrator that we have to screen a lot of that constant bombardment of complaints that comes from the community and look for patterns of behavior that need to be addressed and then not bother the teachers with all of the ones that do not. What could have been done for me? The districts have policies. I would have liked it if the district had just stood by their policies. There was, some controversy around the restraint of students, which the district has a policy for. And it is the worst part of any educator's job is ever having two restrained kids. Back when we were all in school, if there was a fight on the playground, you would just go out there and separate the kids and hold them apart. But nowadays, you have to go through training on how to do that properly, and it's got to be done a certain way. I'd had the training, I'd been certified. Um, and it would have been nice just to have the district stand by their policies, even when discussing it and saying, we have a policy that was followed to the T. We support our teachers, and we'll investigate it and go from there. But uh, instead, the district came out and basically just said, "Hey, we had a problem at the school. We got rid of the principal, and now the problem's fixed." But what message does that send to everyone that's still there? That if you have false allegations against you and we're still in the due process, that they're going to throw you under the bus? I think that a stronger messaging of we follow our policies, they followed the policy, and that's why we create these. Would have been a stronger message, and that's the kind of supports that I think would have helped.
And
Okay.
as a follow-up to that, if you could have, looking back on your experience, is there anything you would have done differently?
That's a great question. I think a lot about that. Um, and there's two ways to answer that. It was a great learning experience for me. So of course I've learned and grew from it. Um, but I would also say this, that when I was in the midst of it, I was getting coached by the school district of what to do and had to handle the situations that were happening. And often I would just ask the person who was coaching me or giving me feedback, what do you suggest I do? And I would just take notes and write down the notes. And I would ask them, is there anything else you would recommend I do? And I would take notes. Then I would point out to them, I've done everything that you just asked me to do. And I just want to point out that I was doing all that I can at the time to support this educator. I was doing everything that a principal would be expected of them, going far beyond meeting with them, coaching with them, buying them alarms so they could get up on time. And but definitely, there are some things that I would have done differently, and it was a learning experience for me.
Got it. Part to you, are there any protocols you think administrators can establish or implement to ensure that, educators are treated fairly when any complaints are made against them, regardless of, regarding politically sensitive content? How can you as an administrator, I know you're not still an administrator, but when you were an administrator, how do you think you could have put protections in place to shield teachers from these external pressures so they can continue to maintain educational excellence?
Yeah, I'm sure that there's individuals who think Park didn't do a very good job with this, and then there's others that their experience was good and they think I did. I think the key, yes, we always have policies, written policies, but I think the key for administrators is to have a reoccurring conversations with their faculty, whether it's in department or grade levels, whether it's all school, etc., that set the tone for how we are going to approach our students on a daily basis. And we used love language with our kids and with our teachers that we love you, we have high expectations for you, and this is how we're going to function as a school. And sometimes we had to have difficult conversations. So, what I'm thinking of right now, uh, when we moved away from what I think of as gay and lesbian language and went to LGBTQ plus, etc. And we started having students demonstrably different than they were just 2 years ago. We had to have a lot of conversations with our faculty about language, about names, about how we treat kids, and those were difficult times. That was more difficult than having conversations about race in our community. Not that we didn't need to have conversations about race as well. We needed to be talking about all the things that influenced our school curriculum and school community, and then lastly, our students, because schools are for kids, and so we want them to be safe. I think the key for administrators is to have a regular process of conversation with teachers in small groups and larger groups so that everybody understands this is the way we do this here at our school. That's not foolproof. You're going to step in it one way or another. You might as well step in it by attempting to be prepared for it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Park. I see we're at the top of the hour. This brings us to the close of tonight's webinar. I'd like to thank Ed and Park for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for putting up with my remainder of my cold. So I'd just like to remind the audience that tonight's webinar is one in a series of that FAIR is launched to celebrate America's upcoming 250th anniversary in July of next year. So sorry, guys. So what this campaign is about is, rather than merely looking backward at what our founders accomplished, we'll examine how today's Americans across all demographics, backgrounds, and beliefs are applying those same foundational principles to solve contemporary problems in America. So we're demonstrating, that's our goal, to demonstrate that democracy isn't a relic to be preserved, but a living experiment that demands our active participation. And I also want to remind our viewers that FAIR has just relaunched its Educators Alliance group. Our alliance will host a monthly gathering with updates and presentation from FAIR staff, education fellows, chapter leaders, and occasional guest speakers. We launched last month. And stay tuned for in our newsletter to look for our next educators meeting in November and in December. My apologies. And the goal of our alliance is to equip K through 12 educators with knowledge, strategies, and community support that they need to foster schools that are more enriching and free from bias for students and educators, like our guests have explained tonight. It's so important to have neutral, unbiased, and truly authentically diverse classroom environments. So be sure to keep an eye out in our weekly newsletter for more details. Or I think Dave has maybe dropped a link in our chat, or you can also check our website if you'd like to join the Alliance. And lastly, I want to remind everyone that FAIR exists entirely on goodwill. We're able to operate solely based on donations from curious and interested people like all of you attending tonight. And we do our very best to offer programming and educational content that helps bring awareness, attention, and solutions to what we believe are the most timely and relevant issues facing us. And as America celebrates its first 250 years, we're asking our supporters to help us ensure that the next 250 are grounded in fairness, understanding, and our shared humanity. So join us during this giving season as we work toward our goal of 250 donors who believe in the power of education to unite rather than divide. Your support today will shape tomorrow's citizens, leaders, and bridge builders. Again, the links are in the chat, or you can feel free to visit fairforall.org to make your contribution. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you again for our guests tonight for this wonderful and enlightening conversation, and we will see you at the next FAIR webinar. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.